here's what's going on. Essentially, this president, from day one, has been overreaching the use of executive authority and declarations of emergencies. And it's everything from tariffs, where Article 1 gives the Congress authority to pass those or invoke those, not the president, and now to the use of the Guard as a private police force that basically serves the will of the president and for political purposes. It is extraordinary in our country to have the National Guard deployed. It is even more extraordinary to have the military deployed. There are circumstances where that can be done, but not at the whim of an executive who does it for political reasons. You know, the bottom line here is that the law enforcement responsibilities that are incredibly important for local policing are managed locally. And where you have a president sitting back in the executive office, deciding he wants to go to Portland, he wants to go to Los Angeles, he wants to go to Chicago, he wants to go to Baltimore, and then where there's a review by courts and they categorically reject what he is presenting as a factual basis to allow him to act, and where when there is a rejection, his main advisor, Stephen Miller, calls the judge's ruling legal insurrection. What you're seeing is an act of political will for a political purpose, not for a public safety purpose, an abuse of this claim of emergency authority of the president. You know, a couple of things. Trump's decision to federalize the California National Guard was ostensibly to quell a rebellion and ensure that federal immigration law was enforced. The judge there reviewed the evidence, not the political statements of the president and the White House, and found that there was no rebellion, nor was civilian law enforcement unable to respond to the protest and enforce the law. And the judge rejected what he called a top-down systemic effort to use military troops to execute various sectors of federal law. That's the job of local law enforcement and local federal authorities in law enforcement. And to suggest that the concern the senator has about giving some definition to the Insurrection Act has anything to do with our views on crime, which we are all in favor of reducing. And you, as an Attorney General, senior senator from Connecticut, did an incredible job on that. Criminals did not like you at all. So what we have is a situation where, if we're going to level with the American people, you've got a president who is using the authority of his office, his power, to basically make political decisions and then target blue states and do it for his own personal political reasons as opposed to public safety reasons. You know, in Portland, the judge who reviewed that case concluded that the president had violated the 10th Amendment, which protects states' rights. And by the way, that's not nullification. That's rights that states have, which does not include nullifying any valid federal law. And the judge concluded with, this country has had a longstanding and foundational tradition of resistance to government overreach, especially in the form of military intrusion into civil affairs. This historical tradition boils down to a very simple proposition. This is a nation of constitutional law, not martial law. Now, you know, we saw that video the White House put out with the president wearing a king and with a crown, and King Trump, and he's flying a military jet, and he's dumping stuff on American people who are out protesting. The bottom line is there's some reality to that displaying what the attitude of this president is. The king is the law. That's what the president fundamentally is saying. And the Constitution is the law. And that's what we are saying. And make no mistake, there's no limits to what this president will do. He starts in L.A., goes to Portland. He wants to go to Baltimore. and then for the purpose of putting down what he claims is lawless behavior, but upon review by local judges who have the evidence, find that it's nothing out of the ordinary that the local jurisdiction and law enforcement forces can't handle. What's next? Will we see military deployed to cities where the president does not like the outcome of the vote in the next election? That's a fair question. That is a fair question. So the importance of the senator's bill is that this Congress act to set definitions on what so-called emergencies are and not leave it up to an executive who has demonstrated repeatedly that he will overreach, He has and he will. So I join in the effort to present this legislation to the floor and allow us to debate it and to pass it. And with that, I yield to the senator from Connecticut.
Senator Peter Welch of Vermont delivered an impassioned speech on the Senate floor in support of Senator Richard Blumenthal's proposal to reform and redefine the Insurrection Act. Welch argued that the measure is necessary to curb what he described as a pattern of presidential overreach and the dangerous misuse of emergency powers for political gain. He began by highlighting a growing problem in American governance: the tendency of presidents to stretch executive authority beyond its constitutional bounds. From the use of tariffs, a power explicitly granted to Congress under Article 1, to the declaration of national emergencies, Welch said this president has repeatedly bypassed legislative authority. The latest and most alarming example, he added, is the use of the National Guard as a private police force to advance partisan goals rather than protect public safety. Welch warned that deploying the National Guard or active duty military inside the country should be an extraordinary measure reserved for genuine emergencies. Yet under the current administration, he said, those powers have been exercised at the whim of an executive who does it for political reasons. He pointed out that law enforcement responsibilities belong to local and state governments, not the Oval Office, and that the president's decision to send troops into cities like Portland, Chicago, and Baltimore represented a dangerous intrusion into local affairs. He cited multiple court rulings rejecting the president's claims of emergency powers, noting that judges have found no evidence of rebellion or breakdown in civil order that would justify invoking the Insurrection Act. In one case, a judge called the president's actions a top-down systemic effort to use military troops to execute various sectors of federal law, a clear violation of the constitutional separation between civil and military authority. Welch also condemned the rhetoric coming from within the White House, pointing to senior advisor Stephen Miller's characterization of a judge's ruling as a legal insurrection. Such statements, he argued, reflect a contempt for judicial oversight and a willingness to weaponize the law against political opponents. According to Welch, the pattern is clear. The president has used his power not to preserve public safety but to target so-called blue states for political advantage. In doing so, he said, the administration has violated the 10th Amendment, which safeguards state sovereignty from federal encroachment. This is a nation of constitutional law, not martial law, Welch declared. He referenced a White House video that portrayed King Trump wearing a crown, flying a military jet, and attacking American protesters, an image that, Welch said, symbolized the president's attitude toward power. The king is the law, Welch remarked. That's what this president fundamentally is saying. Welch warned that if such overreach continues unchecked, there is no telling how far it could go. He posed a chilling question. Could the military one day be deployed to cities where the president disapproves of an election result? That, he said, is not far-fetched given the current trajectory. He closed by calling on his colleagues to pass Blumenthal's legislation to define and limit the president's authority under the Insurrection Act. Without such safeguards, Welch warned, future presidents could continue to abuse emergency powers for political ends. He has overreached, Welch said, and he will again unless Congress acts.